Hey, you ever feel like you didn't have any tears left to shed? Lamentations chapter 2 is making me feel this way. Lamentations is this book that it's a response, it's an expression of a people in response to what has happened to them. This utter destruction, this desolation, this loss, hope for the future is gone. As bad as it can get, that's Lamentations. It's interesting how Jeremiah continues to express this cry from a city, from a people. I'm telling you, like, I'm looking through these verses just within chapter 2. Only been through the first 15 so far. I looked through the next few, verses 16 to 19 today, and it's like, man, there's only so many different ways that you can say, damn it, this really sucks. And today, we're going to look at some of these verses. I'm going to pull out some of the things that stood out to me. But in verse 19, we're going to see a little bit of a shift that leads into the hopeful part of the book. And I think it's very important, so pay attention. Don't miss it. For context's sake, there's some questions that I find helpful when I do Bible study. Those are down in the description, so check those out. Keep them in mind. Look for what God is trying to say to you. Verse 16, all your enemies have opened their mouth against you. They hiss and gnash their teeth. They say, we have swallowed her up. Surely this is the day we have waited for. We have found it. We have seen it. Imagine what it would be like to be walking around and knowing that everyone is praying for your downfall, or maybe just feeling that everyone is praying for your downfall. Today, in the social media era, we can feel this all the time. For some of us, it's justified. For some, it's not. But for some reason, we always feel like someone's out to get us, right? And what is that feeling when the fall happens, or when you feel like whatever was out to get you actually got you? You got. What's that feeling like? You can get lost in the moment of your own kind of self-defeat and self-destruction. But a lot of times people will spend more time down in the comments worrying about what everyone else has to say. As a result, that impacts your mentals in a different, non-productive way. All it's going to do is stomp you down even further. And a lot of times, if you focus on that, you don't even see the areas where you can grow. It's interesting. And we definitely don't want to get caught there when it comes to reflecting on the things going on in our lives that we'd rather not experience. Someone's always going to have something to say. Do you have a relationship with God, and do you have a confidence about what God says about you that can get you through that? Verse 17, the Lord has done what he purposed. He has fulfilled his word, which he commanded in days of old. He has thrown down and has not pitied, and he has caused an enemy to rejoice over you. He has exalted the horn of your adversaries. That's interesting. Talking about God fulfilling what he commanded of old, right? When you think of the prophecies and the things that God promised his people, they were always conditional. But it's very easy to say, well, God is promising us all this good, and because I didn't do that, now all of a sudden all these bad things are also coming my way because of God. But again, where's the accountability? Are these bad things happening in some cases because of my own actions? Or is it that someone else is doing something to me that is unwarranted? Talked about this in a previous video, so don't get it twisted. Every bad thing that happens to you is not your fault. Every bad thing that happens to you, it's not your fault. We live in a sinful world. There are going to be bad things that happen to bad people and good people. Everything's messed up as far as that goes. But in certain cases, when it comes to covenant promise, when it comes to things that God has promised to his people, and a lot of it in a conditional sense, it's 1 + 1 = 2. I understand these days some people say there's no 0 and 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, but we're not going there. But it's cause and effect. If I do certain things to break the law, I can expect that if I'm caught, I'm going to go to prison. I'm not going to prison because somebody is unjustly exercising some authority or position over me. I would end up in prison because what I did broke the law. It's crazy how people will try to justify the bad things they do that are against the law to try to avoid the consequence of the law. It's crazy how people will confess for things once they're caught, but before anybody knew, they didn't have anything to say. No diddy. We're not going there either though. But where's the accountability? It's easy for us to blame other people and to blame other situations, but sometimes the things that we experience are because of what we have done, and not because of someone else, and not because of God. It can be that way. There can be both. Verse 18, their heart cried out to the Lord, O wall of the daughter of Zion, let tears run down like a river, day and night. Give yourself no relief. Give your eyes no rest. Ever felt like you've been so sad and all cried out that you don't have a tear left to shed? Let tears run like a river, huh? That's wild. It's one thing where the anguish of the situation is so unbearable, but it's another thing when your attempt at relief from that through your expression, tears, or mourning is also draining for you. That's where Israel is right now. And they're still struggling at the same time with this accountability factor. Until, kind of, we get to verse 19. Arise, cry out in the night. At the beginning of the watches, pour out your heart like water before the face of the Lord. Lift your hands toward him for the life of your children who faint from hunger at the head of every street. What's the implication here? Usually, you're only going to tell someone to wake up if they are yes, sleeping. I'm only going to tell someone to cry out in the night if they've been silent. I'm only going to tell someone that they need to rise up and cry out at the beginning of the watches if this is something they haven't been doing. Why would I tell someone who's already waking up at 6 and getting ready for work, hey, you need to get up at 6 and get ready for work? If I'm telling someone to pour out your heart before the Lord, maybe it's because they weren't pouring out their heart, their true heart, out before the Lord. If I'm telling someone to lift their hands towards God, maybe it's because their hands were in their pockets or they were sitting on them. So this is interesting then, right? Because if these things are not things that the people were doing, does this give us any insight into the perspective and the expression that they have towards God in all of chapter 2 so far? Contextually, you have the night watches and you have the beginning of the watch, the morning time. This is when people would get up to meet God at daybreak, to encounter him there when the sun would come up. It's in Psalm somewhere. I think Psalm 8. Don't quote me on that. I'll have to find it. But he talks about, hold on a second. I got to find this. All right, I didn't find the exact one, but I found another one that I think will help illustrate the point. It's in Proverbs though, not Psalms. Proverbs chapter 8, verses 34 and 35. Blessed is the man who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting at the posts of my doors, for whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. That verse actually fits a lot better than I thought it would. You have this idea of watching daily at the doors, waiting for God to meet for him daily in this moment when you start your day. Why? Because if you can meet with him there, if you find God, you find life and you find favor from the Lord. So if waiting through the night watches and being ready to arise and meet daily with God provides this kind of blessing and favor in life, isn't that the opposite of what we're seeing here in Lamentations? So what's the implication? These people in word worship me and they say all these things, but inside they're not about that life. That's what's happening. God's anger to the people of Israel is a perception of God because they don't have the relationship with him. Because in words and in deeds, they're professing this relationship. They're professing this life-changing power that they have and that they're partnered with. But deep down inside in their hearts, they're not really about that life. Think about the way verse 19 ends. They're fainting because of the hunger. Why? Because they're not filled. You're hungry because you are empty. They're empty because they haven't been waiting daily at the gates. They haven't been diligent in arising and crying out to God and embracing in this struggling relationship with him. I think it's really cool that God can handle our struggles and our hard times and even our outbursts of pain and despair and all of that. But wouldn't you rather express these things to God in the context of a relationship? I'm thinking to my relationships with people even now, and how the more connected you are with people, the more there's actually love there. You can have harder conversations and still come out the other side okay. But people that you don't have a relationship with, you can't say certain things to in that kind of way. Otherwise, you're going to have even more issues. There's something there. And there's an accountability factor there as well. We got to be mindful of that. Jeremiah's continuing to hit us with these left cross, right cross of the perspective that people have of God, but also this lack of accountability, while showing that maybe the lack of accountability and the view of God is due from a lack of a relationship with God. And the irony there is that it's not because God is lacking on his part, but it's because his people are lacking on their part. What can I take away from this in a practical sense? How do I view God? What's my relationship with him like? Is it something that when it's all good, hey, God is good all the time God is good? Or is it something that I'm wrestling with God and I'm struggling through life with him? And I understand that because we have this relationship and this connection, God can handle all of my nonsense. He can listen to all of my complaining and we can still get through on the other side. What will it take for you and me and our experiences to get to the point where we decide to take accountability? What might it take in our experiences for us to get to a place where we can acknowledge the reality of that relationship and not just paint something pretty for everyone else on the outside to see, but actually have something where we're consistent, daily showing up at the watches, at the gates, ready to have this encounter with God that can change our lives. It's interesting. You have this contrast in verse 19 as well. Pour out your heart. That's almost like saying, empty yourself, right? But at the end of that same verse, it said they're hungry and they're empty. So pouring out ourselves towards God may be the thing that actually fills us up. And if that's true, then all the effort that we spend in trying to get up early, hard as it might be, it's hard for me this morning, I'm not gonna lie, it could be that all of the energy that we spend in trying to connect with God will fill us up on the back end. So that way we don't have these expressions and these crazy misperceptions of who God is. And I think if we're getting there, then we're getting close to where we need to be. And at the same time we're getting close to where we need to be, we're also getting further from experiencing something like this that we see in Lamentations chapter 2. But the crazy thing is, despite all of this, and despite this misconception of who God is, despite this misunderstanding of God's anger, but despite this lack of accountability, God is still here and God is still willing to help his people. What does that mean for you? What does that mean for me? Shoot, it means a lot. That's the kind of relationship that I want to embrace. That's the kind of relationship that I want to pursue. Now we'll see how it goes. Jeremiah's been hinting at it here and there in little pockets in the first couple chapters so far, but there are still some more verses left in chapter 2. And we'll see the flip again, go from this little recognition back to something else. And it has to go this way before it finally turns and we get to see the outcry and the hope. And then it changes again, but we'll get there when we get there. This has been a pretty cool learning experience for me. I hope it's been for you as well. Tune in, catch up with the other videos if you haven't seen them yet so you're all caught up. Hey, it's the Buff Missionary. We out here and we out. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.